Imagine going to sleep feeling fine and waking up already condemned. A sudden fever, crushing pain, then swelling, hard, black lumps forming beneath the arms, along the neck, behind the ears. Within days, sometimes hours, people were dead. Entire households vanished overnight. Church bells rang so often they lost meaning. Graves filled, then overflowed. Cities stopped counting the bodies. Across Europe, the same whispered fear spread from mouth to mouth. Is this the end? What no one understood was that they were living through the most lethal pandemic humanity had ever recorded. A catastrophe so vast it would erase generations, dismantle social order, and permanently alter the course of history. This was the Black Death, and once it arrived, escape was an illusion. A world at its peak. To understand how devastating the plague was, we first need to understand what existed before it. The early 1300s were not a dark age. They were a high point. Europe was thriving. For centuries, warmer temperatures had produced reliable harvests. Food was abundant. The population exploded. Cities expanded far beyond their old Roman boundaries. Paris, London, Florence, Venice were overcrowded, loud, alive. Stone cathedrals climbed toward the sky, symbols of confidence, faith, and human ambition. Even more important, the world was connected. Trade routes stretched from China to the Mediterranean, protected by Mongol rule. Silk, spices, gold, and ideas moved faster than ever before. A merchant in Italy could profit from goods that crossed half the planet. It felt like progress was unstoppable. But this global web had a flaw. It could carry more than wealth. The invisible enemy. Far from Europe, in the open grasslands of Central Asia, lived an ancient organism, a bacterium that had existed quietly for thousands of years, Yersinia pestis. It thrived among rodents like marmots and ground squirrels, passed silently by fleas. Normally, it stayed there, locked into a stable ecosystem, until that balance broke. In the early 14th century, environmental stress hit the steppes. Droughts, sudden rains, collapsing food chains. Rodents moved closer to human settlements. Their fleas came with them. The jump had been made. The first human victims appeared along Silk Road trading posts. They burned with fever. They vomited. Their lymph nodes swelled into painful, dark masses. No one understood what they were seeing. Rumors traveled west long before the disease itself. Stories of entire regions collapsing, cities in the east empty, death falling like a curse. Europe listened, but did not feel threatened. Yet the executioner was already on the road. The gateway to Europe. The turning point was a city on the edge of the Black Sea, Kaffa, a fortified Genoese stronghold rich beyond measure. The hinge between Asia's land routes and Europe's sea lanes. In 1346, Kaffa was under siege by the Mongol Golden Horde. The walls held. Supplies arrived by ship. The defenders believed time was on their side. Then the Mongol army began dying. Not from battle, from plague. Bodies blackened, soldiers collapsed by the thousands. Desperate and facing defeat, the Mongol commander made a decision that would echo through history. The dead were loaded into siege engines and launched. For days, corpses smashed into the city streets. Walls meant to keep enemies out became meaningless. The disease entered Kaffa. The wealthy fled first. Genoese ships slipped out of the harbor, packed with refugees, cargo, and rats. They sailed west. The plague enters Europe. The first European city to fall was Messina, in Sicily. When the ships arrived, the scene was unmistakable. Dead sailors on deck, survivors barely alive, covered in boils, bleeding, delirious. Authorities ordered the ships expelled. Too late. Rats had already escaped. Fleas followed. Within weeks, Messina collapsed. People fled, spreading the disease across the island. From there, the plague followed Europe's arteries. Genoa, Venice, Marseille. Ports closed, but greed reopened them. Quarantines were attempted, but imperfect. Venice would later invent isolation zones, forcing ships to wait 40 days before landing. It was revolutionary, but for this first wave, it was useless. From the coasts, the plague moved inland, along rivers, along roads, into the heart of Europe. Cities of death. Medieval cities were perfect breeding grounds. Narrow streets, crowded housing, open sewage, constant human contact. Once the plague arrived, the city itself stopped functioning. Doctors were helpless. They believed the air was poisoned. They blamed planetary alignments. They burned incense. They bled patients. They cut open buboes, accelerating death. Nothing worked. Fear dissolved society. Parents abandoned children. The sick were locked inside homes. Markets shut down. Courts vanished. Law ceased to exist. Bodies piled faster than they could be buried. Mass graves were dug. Layer upon layer of the dead, barely covered. Even church bells eventually fell silent. God's wrath and human cruelty. To medieval minds, this could only mean one thing: divine punishment. People flooded churches, praying together, spreading the disease faster. Others turned to extremes. Flagellant groups marched across Europe, whipping themselves in public squares, spilling blood in hopes of appeasing God. And when prayers failed, the search for someone to blame began. Jewish communities became targets. False accusations of poisoned wells spread rapidly. Despite official condemnations, mobs acted. Entire communities were massacred. The plague exposed humanity's darkest instincts as much as its fear. The countryside collapses. The disease did not stop at city walls. It reached villages. In some regions, entire settlements disappeared forever. Fields went unharvested. Livestock wandered unattended. The manorial system collapsed. Nature reclaimed abandoned land. Wolves crept closer to human habitations. Forests advanced. By 1350, the plague reached the far north. Even Greenland's Norse colonies were doomed. Then, slowly, it burned out. There were simply too few people left. A world forever changed. By the time the first wave ended, tens of millions were dead. In Europe, perhaps half the population vanished. But from the devastation came transformation. Labor was scarce. Workers demanded higher wages.
The plague took our families, but taught us our worth. We will no longer accept the old wages. Pay us fairly or the harvest rots.
Serfdom weakened. Old hierarchies cracked. Art fixated on death. The dance of death reminded everyone that kings and peasants fell alike. The optimism of the High Middle Ages was gone. What replaced it was a more cautious, questioning world. The Black Death shattered civilization and forced it to evolve. For centuries, it felt like a nightmare locked safely in the past. But empty streets, fear of the air, isolation, uncertainty, does that really feel so distant? History does not repeat perfectly, but it remembers, and so should we.